Yeah, I don't know. Let's get straight to it, huh? Let's talk Game of Thrones. So let's get this out of the way right up front. Obviously, something very big happened this week on Game of Thrones. And if you're trying to avoid spoilers still, you can just turn this off right now. And what happened was Robb Stark was ambushed and killed. You know, this was, to say the least, unexpected in terms of where the story seems to be going. It was a huge twist, but some of the national reaction to this twist was so massive that the meta conversation almost dwarfs what actually happened in the show. I don't know if either of you are feeling the same way, but I can barely talk about what happened because I want to talk about people talking about what happened.
I just remember seeing my Facebook feed lighting up, like one person at a time, like, oh my god, oh, and it just like kept coming. I'm like, oh, so that's when you watched it? That's when you watched it? Okay. So I like knew everybody's DVR watching habits just by the Game of Thrones episode.
Well, Shannon, you've read the book, so obviously you knew what was coming. Do you think you enjoyed the episode more or less because you knew what was coming?
I think I enjoyed it more because I knew it was coming, and that's because I think this is one of the cases where I think the book handled this whole Red Wedding, as it's affectionately called in the fandom, better.
Oh.
Because I think what the show was trying to do and what they did do effectively was shock everybody, surprise everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas in the books, like just from the beginning of that chapter, you get this like sense of unease. Like there's a lot of foreshadowing. Something just feels off. It's creepy. Like it almost feels like a horror story all of a sudden. Like you get the sense that something is going to happen. So it's this like tension. Like something's fucked up. What is it? And then obviously it is fucked up and it's revealed, and so it's this nice release, as opposed to in the show I felt like it was sort of, downplayed in order to raise the surprise factor.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. Have more to say about that, but Bob, I want to ask you though, did you watch it before the entire internet blew up talking about what a huge thing happened?
Not exactly. I was like 1 day delayed. I didn't watch it Sunday night. I watched it Monday night. So I did have that first wave of like, something big's going to happen. What is it? And seeing everybody.
Were you spoiled?
No, I wasn't spoiled. I mean, people were pretty good about that. It's interesting how internet culture, at least among friends, maybe I don't check out Twitter as much as other people do, but at least on Facebook, everyone was just blowing up in their own way, but like holding back the details for the benefit of the rest of us, I suppose.
Yeah, Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Shannon.
I think it is really amazing and cool how long the spoiler has been kept under wraps. I mean, considering this book came out like 10 years ago. Like, it's kind of amazing that more people didn't know about it.
Right.
Well, so your situation, Bob, was you weren't spoiled, but you knew something big was coming. Do you think that made you enjoy it more or less than if you just watched it on Sunday night?
I think it actually made me enjoy it more because I was looking forward to something. I was pumped. The episode had good pacing. I was really into it. And then when it happened, I was like, this is it. This was what everyone was talking about. And it just seemed really exciting until it wasn't. And then I was sad. And then, yeah. But it helped like bridge that gap of like, I can't believe they did this because we were all participating together in the craziness of a TV show killing off, what would normally be half the cast, but since it's Game of Thrones, it's the largest cast in all of history. It's like 1/10 of the cast, but still, it seemed like huge, right?
It did seem huge. Well, so here's my take. I think mine's slightly different than either of yours, actually. So I didn't watch it until Monday morning, but by then it was pretty obvious something groundbreaking had occurred. To be quite honest, my first clue was actually Shannon's Facebook page. It was something like
someone's in trouble.
Settling in, it's going to be a rough one. It is known, or something like that.
It is known. Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't that big. But I mean, I knew something was coming, sort of in the way Bob mentioned.
Well, also the title of the episode. Did you see the title before? Do you like read the titles and the description before you watch, or no?
Yeah, but that didn't make sense to me until reading reviews. So the title was The Rains of Castamere, right? Which is like the Lannisters' theme song, their fight song, whatever.
Yes, yeah. Cersei explained it to Marjorie in a previous episode about the origin of the song and how it's about a house trying to rise up against a more dominant house and being crushed.
So yeah, that was not.
It's funny. And both Logan and I are like, yeah, we knew that.
Yeah.
I had
The
no
Rains
idea,
of
actually.
Castamere.
Anyway, but it was obvious that something big was going to happen by the time I watched it, even Monday morning. But I feel like I want to talk about this concept of avoiding spoilers in our culture. You're right. I think society at large, certainly the TV watching part of society, is taking this pretty seriously. We are not going to spoil this, but there is something that is going to happen. But I wonder if we take it too seriously. And I feel like I may be alone here on this one, but sure, the twist was big, but it was almost disappointing after the size of the outcry, I feel like. On the one hand, I think there's an argument made that you can enjoy something almost just as much if you already know what happens, and Shannon's experience to some extent supports that.
Yeah.
But you know what I think is even worse than being completely surprised or being completely spoiled? Being warned of huge spoilers. It's like a no-win situation at that point, like a Kobayashi Maru. That's like third on the list. I'd rather not be spoiled, and then I'd rather be spoiled, and then third, I'd rather be told, it's gonna be big!
Nice. I haven't thought of it in that context. I guess you're kind of right that ideally I wouldn't want to know anything because then it would be that much more impactful. But I don't know. What can you expect from this day and age when everyone's interconnected, and unless you're watching it live, or maybe that's like a slap on the wrist for people like us who are way into TV, like, what's our problem, Logan? Why are we watching it on a Monday? Like, what are we doing so important on a Sunday night that we can't watch Game of Thrones?
Well, there's Mad Men getting in the way sometimes, but
I watch them back to back. It's rough. It's a lot.
It's rough. It's such a hard Sunday night when these two great shows are on.
So emotional.
Right?
Well, so man, I'm blanking here on our live hangout. I had something I was just going to say.
It's a lot of pressure. Sorry.
No, we're fine. I got it back. So I watched it a second time, and I felt like I appreciated the episode more because I could pick out those things that were the sense of dread that Shannon was talking about. I don't know if you know this well enough, Shannon, but when they went to the bedding ceremony, which is something we're going to have to talk about more later on. But after they took everyone to that, the band started playing this different tune. And
that's the Rains of Castamere.
Catelyn Stark obviously was disturbed by that. I was wondering, that is the Rains of Castamere.
That is it, yeah.
And that's when she started getting worried. But I didn't catch that until the second time.
So one question about the bedding ceremony, just logistically. What happened to that dude and his wife? It's just sort of everybody died and we were all preoccupied with the spoiler that then we're like, oh yeah, somebody got married. Did they die or live? Are they good or bad? I have no idea.
Well, they haven't shown it in this episode yet, so I don't know if you want me to answer that or not.
Here we go again with like, no spoilers!
But as far as we know, they were removed from the hall, so at least they weren't there.
Yeah.
That's all they showed.
We have not seen them die, at least, so.
Yeah, we didn't see them die. And also, I'm pretty sure the Blackfish, Catelyn's brother, he made a big point of being like, I'm going to go pee, and everybody was like, okay. So, so I don't think he's dead either.
I like that dude. He's pretty like rugged and tough and cool.
Yeah, he's a badass.
Yep, exactly.
All right, so it's obviously big because of the meta conversation about spoilers, but also in the story, we've got this new thing we got to deal with, Rob's death, and it obviously affects the story in a serious way. Bob,
but does it?
Well, yeah, tell me, Bob, are you shocked, disappointed, upset?
I was for like 5 seconds until I realized that, like, wait, what was Robb Stark around for anyway? I mean, he theoretically was... Well, I mean...
every episode he tells us how he never loses a battle. We don't see these battles. But
I know,
admits he never loses a battle.
He's always in a tent with like such a stern look with like a fur coat on or something, and you know, he either just talks about how he's going to kick ass or he makes love to his wife. But he's just like so written to be this character that is so good and righteous and...
Sort of like his dad.
Sort of like his dad. And sort of like his dad, he dies.
Yeah.
Except for, I had a softer spot. I don't know about you guys, but I had a softer spot for Ned Stark. Like, that affected me more when Ned died than when Robb died. I guess maybe I was already desensitized to the idea of important people dying, especially 3 seasons in, but somehow Robb didn't have quite the emotional tension or struggles that Ned always seemed to have. in making decisions. So that when Rob died, I'm like, oh, that guy that was so good died. That I mean, I knew he was the good guy, but I didn't relate to him as like a character troubled. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you didn't relate to him personally. Does that mean that you also didn't care? I mean, as far as like the story arc, like it's sort of set up to be like Ned dies in the first season and Rob is going to avenge him. So like that whole cause is now lost. Like, did that strike you at all?
No, because we've still got good old Jon Snow, and even though there's some something to be said about him not being, you know, the direct descendant in a bloodline where he's
I think there's a lot to be said about that in this sort of universe, but go ahead.
Yeah, but in my universe of relating to people, it's like, the bastard son can avenge everyone. That's good enough for me.
But he can. He's part of the Night's Watch, and the Night's Watch takes no part in the Kingdom's wars. So he literally can't do anything.
Well, the Night's Watch isn't supposed to make love to women randomly either, so I think he's going to do something. I don't know, though. I don't want to... That's my speculation. Don't confirm or deny it. But he's already sort of broken the rules to the point where killing more people isn't really going to be a problem.
So I feel like it's sort of the Mormon thinking, right? You slip up, you have sex. Oh, I may as well just lead an entire army to crush the largest, most powerful family in this universe. It's all the same now.
They're kind of the same thing.
It's a slippery slope.
Right. Make one little mistake and drink some coffee, and then all of a sudden you're avenging, you know, your father's death.
All right. What's your take on this as a development, Shannon?
I think it was more meant to. I mean, I think it was more meant to subvert this whole, traditional fantasy arc of a story. I mean, Ned dies in the first season, and like everybody says, like, that was a huge shock because he's set up to be like, he's this honorable guy, he's a powerful house, he's really likable, he's beloved by his people, he's going to set right, all these wrongs that are being done by these other slimy politicians, and then no, he dies. And so then I think that this is just another echo of that. Like, here's another guy who's like taking up the arms where his father, left off, and he's going to right the wrong now, and now he dies. So I think this is just, it's another part of the story that goes back to what Cersei Lannister said in the first season to Ned Stark. You play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. And the way that Rob was playing it, he lost.
I'm pretty sympathetic to that view. I think I tend to agree. What I love about this show, well, I hear some people say that they love, just the big sword fights and the armies and the dragons and the traditional fantasy things, and that's fine for me. But I love the things this does, sort of subverting the fantasy genre in a way, almost. Like you're talking about, these big, important people will die, and that's the second one, which is huge. And then, of course, I love just how politics, power, is what rules the day instead of magic or whoever is the best person.
Yeah, or inherent goodness or inherent evil. That's not...
Right.
It's obvious to us now that is not going to be... any kind of harbinger about anybody's fate. You're good, you're bad. It doesn't play it doesn't play into how you're gonna die at all.
Right, and that's what I love about this this show, and this, I guess, I imagine it's pretty similar in the books.
Yeah, I think it just establishes this world as being senseless and brutal. Very much modeled after the the time in history that it's sort of emulating.
So let me ask: do we know if we're set up to see this story play out with the characters that are in it now? Maybe this isn't too much of a spoiler if Shannon can share really broadly, but I'm just wondering, as the story progresses, if people are going to die off enough that there's going to be a whole new cast of characters introduced in the second half of the books or something, or if it's we're not going to see that as much. We have the established base for who's actually fighting for the throne, and we're going to see it through to the end, which hasn't been written because he's still writing the books, or if there's going to be a total refresh. Okay, maybe I am asking for specificity.
Yeah, that's a big I feel like that's a big spoiler.
All right, never mind.
Bob just wants to know if he can unlock his heart, if it's okay to love again.
Love love again. I don't know.
Well, I have some more specific questions for you, Shannon, our Game of Thrones expert, just to help me make sense of this stuff.
That aren't spoiler related. Tell me what happens 3 books from now. Okay.
Okay, so just going through as I watched the second time. Now, the Hound and Arya have kind of a Jamie Brienne thing going on, don't they?
They do. I love that. I love that's another thing I like about the show. I mean, the story is that it throws together these odd couples of people and these like unholy alliances where people are like dependent on somebody who they don't totally trust, or maybe in some cases they completely hate for their survival. And Arya and the Hound, I really like that dynamic because, I mean, we've already seen the Hound sort of have a soft spot for her older sister Sansa, and it's kind of, it was sort of unclear like where that came from. And I like seeing that echoed in the relationship between Arya and the Hound. Like he's sort of this. Arya kind of draws these really strong men to her. I don't know if you've noticed that. Like she had that
with
guy,
Tywin,
the assassin guy who who helped her, Aaron Hall, and now the Hound. She's drawn to these really strong warrior killers, and they see something in her, you know. So I think that's really telling of who she is as a character and where her path is leading her.
Yeah. How old is she? I mean, I feel like if she were a little older, like if she were a full-grown woman, the way she bickers with the Hound, they'd be boning in no time with all that sexual tension.
That's something that's to her advantage as well, is that she's young enough to where these men aren't seeing her that way, you know. Plus she's dressed as a boy, so she's got that like, she's got this like innocence, but inside of it they see something in her, something darker and stronger. So her age in the books, so they've aged everybody up for the show to make all the boning and the rape feel less horrible. But in the, I think she's like 12.
Okay.
Something like that.
I think her dad, Ned, saw something in her like that because he gave her fighting lessons and stuff like that too.
Yeah, he gave her the sword. No, John gave her the sword, but gave her the fighting lessons.
Yeah, I can't decide if I'm more or less interested just because she's on team already lost. So from that perspective, like, it's kind of cool to see where the Starks go from here because it's all fallen apart for them, and she couldn't reunite with her family, and she is a pretty feisty character. But on the other hand, like, who's going to win the throne? And it feels like she might not have enough to go that far, but we still want to know.
Wait a second. How come she can't, but Jon Snow can, Bob?
Because Jon Snow...
Jon Snow.
Yeah?
He knows nothing.
He's so epic. No, she can. Sure, she could. I guess if she gets older and tougher and wiser. But Jon Snow. Oh, I don't know.
All right.
It could go either way.
Speaking of Jon Snow, you know, his new supposed friends, they start to get suspicious of his loyalty, and it turns out with good reason, as he turns on him. But my question, Shannon, is why on earth did Jon Snow bail on Ygritte like that? Do we know? Has it told us?
I mean, so based on what we've seen so far, he was baited to become an undercover, agent,
right,
with the Wildlings by Qhorin Halfhand, who died. So Jon, he was doing everything he could to fit in with them, and the Wildlings have this, they have a different view about sex and marriage and all those things, and so Jon went native for a while with them.
Is that what they call it these days?
Actually, it's a pretty much the traditional sense of that, I think.
Yeah, he really went native. He took a wildling girl, and I think that from what we've seen so far, like, this is, I don't want to, not looking to the future at all, but I think that what they're trying to tell us is that he never intended. I mean, what was his plan? What could he do? He couldn't bring her to the wall. He was still a crow on the inside, and they take no wives, they own no lands. He was always going to go back, and he couldn't take her with him.
So yeah, basically is what it seemed like, that he just had to choose, and he didn't choose her, and so that's a little sad.
He chose the life of this old man. He chose honor over her in the end.
Did Logan, was your heart broken or something? Because I sort of felt like their love scene and his promises of whatever, I always thought it was kind of a facade. Like, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. It felt very like...
It was doomed?
Yeah, it was doomed. And maybe it also helped that I don't really like Ygritte, this character. I don't know how she comes across in the book, but yeah, she at first she seemed okay, but now she feels a little overplayed and like trying to be as super tough as a wildling, but she seems like a flower to me that's trying to be tough. I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think that's in the show. I think that's partially the show's fault, the way they've portrayed the wildlings. In the books, there are more women. She's not the only only woman. And I think that
Right.
kind of contributes to that image of her. It's like, why is she the girl in the boys' club? Whereas in the Wildlings, women have a much greater role. There's this whole army of women called Spear Wives, and she's one of them. And so I think that's kind of a show thing.
Well, I actually
that
like
helps.
her. I do like her a lot. I was kind of sad when he ditched her because she acts all
Yeah.
tough, but she's really sort of vulnerable, and it's partly a facade, even though she's kind of tough. I don't know. I like Ygritte as a character.
All right, fine.
And they're also a lot more fun. I think in the show, I mean, because the show's so serious, and maybe to echo, like, maybe
Jon Snow.
Jon Snow. The Wildlings are so serious, but the Wildlings are like wily. They're fun. They're bawdy. They drink. There's women around. There's kids around all the time in the books. Like it's like they're whole people. They're a people. Whereas in the show, they're kind of showing us more as if they're like an army unit that's doing this
Right.
mission.
Yeah, that's true.
But only sort of, because there's only like ever 6 of them, but they think that they can take on the world, and it's like you just see the like these epic scenes of scaling the wall where they barely survive, and then they're like, and now we're gonna take over the world. It's like, dude, you just scaled a wall and half of you almost died. You know,
Yeah.
cool it, slow it down a little bit there.
I think that's another show thing too. They're just limited with casting, and so that really makes it hard to show the
Right.
scope of the whole thing.
Right,
but
because
I'm with Bob on this one because when Jon Snow says, "There's no way you're going to win," from what I've seen, it's like, yeah, there's no way you're going to win. Are you saying, Shannon, that it's not so obvious in the books that they might actually win?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot more people that they're not showing on the show. I mean, in the books, and I think on the show they did explain this, but then they haven't really shown it, so I think we've forgotten that basically all the wildlings, like all people north of the wall, are coming south. So they're basically focusing in, kind of like with Rob, they only show him in his war tent, so you don't really get this idea of how many people he really has. But all the wildlings are there, and so they're just kind of honing in on like a couple of their war leaders, I think, for these scenes. But
oh, that helps because with Rob, even though you only see him in his tent, you just know that he's commanding armies or whatever. But with the wildlings, like they have the one scene where Jon Snow has to fight them, and I'm like, oh, did they all die? Is that whole population gone? Now there's just like the one last badass guy that then Jon Snow runs away, which is the other thing I was confused about. I'm like, dude, you just took out like 5 people, and you have a wolf on your side, and there's only one dude left. If you really wanted this woman, I'm pretty sure you could take him out, you know. But he just took off, and maybe it's because behind the camera there was like 70,000 other people, or there's a lot more going on.
well, I think what they did is like they were dispatched by Mance Rayder, like the Wildling King, to go over the wall. Like a small group of people. Like to prove Jon's loyalty, that Jon was going to show them how to get over.
Gotcha.
I think that's what they were saying.
Okay, so Shannon, what exactly is this betting ceremony? This is the second time it's come up, but so I think we know about it that I can remember is that it's to make sure that they consummate, and that Catelyn says Ned would have broken someone's jaw if they'd have done it. What is going on with
What's the
this
betting
thing?
ceremony? So that's actually taken straight from history. Whenever there's an important wedding, everybody goes and watches them have sex.
All right.
Or at least stays in the room. If they're taken upstairs. And I think that the cultural add-ons that Kat is talking about is that it's like this body thing where all the women carry up the guy and all the men carry up the girl, and they slowly take off their clothes on the way to the bedchamber. And it's very like funny and like supposed to be titillating and kind of embarrassing. I think it's just like an embarrassing Westeros wedding custom that Ned Stark like had no time for. He was like, no. And also, when Ned and Catelyn got married, it wasn't a very happy affair because Catelyn was supposed to marry Ned's brother, and he died. So Ned was taking his brother's place, and they had never met before. So I think the whole thing was a lot more somber. And
So he said that funny quip about it, but it was really just to sort of diffuse the weirdness of the whole thing.
The weirdness of it, yeah. Like, this isn't really that fun.
So, does it lead to a general acceptance of people? So this is like another Mormon upbringing question, Logan. Does it lead to like a general acceptance of like people seeing each other naked, or is it like an exception where it's like on this one instance we take off a random person's clothes, but otherwise that's inappropriate? Like, I'm just wondering, what is that?
I think we see a lot of naked people in Westeros.
I think throughout
wars, but
I think throughout history, the idea that sex and nakedness are completely private, that's pretty recent, like 200 years or something like that. I mean, it's pretty recent in history, I think.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, in this case, this is, it's another way of. So, in this time, marriage alliances, that's the greatest and sometimes only like political ammo that these people have. To form alliances and pacts with each other, it's marriage. You have to seal it through marriage. So
Sure.
it's not marriage is not a private thing that belongs to you and this other person. It belongs to your two houses. It belongs to the realm. You're kind of doing your
Sure.
duty, and to seal the marriage pact, you have to have sex, and so it's kind of like not a private thing. People are there; they want to make sure you do it because you need an heir. You need to produce an heir to solidify the whole agreement. So, I think it's a political thing.
So marriage being between two people and having something private between them, that's kind of evolved both in the show and historically. It involved a lot more people. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like Rob's breach of the marriage contract with the phrase like should not be, like that is a really serious thing that he did. Like he made an alliance, a political alliance with a house, and he broke it for love. That is not done. Like in modern day, we see that as being idealistic and like kind of forgivable if a little bit misguided. It was not done then. Like there were arranged marriages, and you do it. You go through with it because, like I said, it's political currency. It's not about you. Like you don't have the right to do that. And so he really, really botched that. And I think that was his death sentence.
Probably.
And in the books, it was done a little bit differently too. In the show, it's given to us, and I think it's a more modern take on it. He fell in love, and so he didn't want to marry someone else because he fell in love with this girl. In the books, he had sex with a girl and then felt bad about it after, and felt like he had to honor her by marrying her. A girl he didn't really know, and that makes a lot more sense to me.
That sense of honor, that stark sense of honor.
It makes more sense with a stark sense of honor that he's like, God, I ruined her. She's a high lady. Now no one else will marry her. I have to marry her. Whereas in the show, he made a choice. He was like, I'm in love with her. I want to spend my life with her. Da 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 da.
Right.
All right. Well, I have one more thing. Let's see if we can get this done quickly. But how do we feel about the sexism portrayed in this show? Obviously, women, as a rule, not in all cases. I mean, we see Daenerys Targaryen, but the women, are obviously lower than the men in status. Do we just give the show a total pass because it's fantasy, or is it even possible for a fantasy show like this to go too far, or do we just excuse everything?
Oh, I thought it was funny because when you were saying obviously, I thought you were going to follow it up with like, obviously, not in every case, but all the women have Brazilian waxes, and
is that sexism?
That's that's not accurate.
Well, maybe not in the book, but it's kind of 21st century grooming standards are shown in the show, and it's kind of one of those.
It's really it's really inaccurate. Yeah.
You mean like
for women to be shaved? That's not accurate.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Anyone want to hit my question?
Well, I'm just throwing that out maybe as a sideways way of hitting the question, but it seems like there's a lot going on in the show that's just to appeal to a certain demographic more than be accurate or try to say anything about sexism, which is saying something about sexism if it's trying to appeal to men, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a disproportionate amount of female nudity to male nudity in the show, and there are opportunities for them to take advantage of that. As far as like if there's a sex scene between two characters, we're way more likely to see the woman in full frontal than we are the man. So
right.
I think that is true. I think that's true of all television and movies.
Yeah, it is, right? And maybe we're asking too much of Game of Thrones of all shows to like push the envelope on egalitarian showing of male, body parts or whatever. I don't know.
Well, is that the goal? Is that what would be the most equal? I mean, if you notice, men's magazines have women on the cover, and women's magazines have women on the cover. It seems like everyone would rather look at women.
Well, there is that. Maybe that's true. Speaking as a man, I can concur. Maybe, I don't know. Do women only like looking at women when it comes to objectifying beauty or whatever? Or I don't know.
No. I mean, I think that there are women on the cover of men's magazines and women on the cover of women's magazines for the same reason that it's okay to objectify women, and it's not as okay to objectify men in our culture. I think that's all it is. And I guess it is an echo of this medieval state of the relationship between men and women and sex. I mean, women are objectified a lot in this society, and they are on the show, but in this particular case, is HBO making a statement about that? Artistically, probably not. They're probably just, staying with the status quo of boobs.
Like, yeah, because part of their business is to get ratings. And
yeah.
A naked woman gets more ratings than naked men, probably.
And a lot of those sex scenes are in the book, but, I mean, in the book, there are penises present.
Yeah, I figured just like in real life they exist too. Wait, so did we just give HBO a free sexism pass? Did I miss something? Oh yeah, but everyone has to do this to sell their show.
I don't think that was a pass. I think that was an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, there are reasons.
Okay? Yeah. I mean, is it okay that they do that? Not really, but they're not the only ones. I don't know if that's a pass. I mean, it's just seeing what's there.
So what about the content of the story other than just the nudity? I mean, would there be other ways to do it instead of such huge patriarchal power structures in a fantasy novel, or would it just be totally unbelievable?
Yeah, I think it would be, because I think it's based after, it's modeled after a specific time in our real history, and I think that actually a lot of the events, the more gruesome ones, and a lot of the political alliances are echoes of real history. I guess the Red Wedding is supposed to be modeled after this real thing from ancient Scottish history called the Black Dinner. It wasn't a wedding, but it was the same kind of thing. A house was invited to someone else's house, and they got slaughtered, which is considered
pretty close.
Pretty close. And so, yeah, of course, I mean, this society is really misogynistic, and I think that we see that in the story a lot. I mean, there are, as far as feminism, I do think that the inclusion of female characters that do something is a feminist act. I mean, versus if we just even look at Lord of the Rings, I mean, there are 2 women in Lord of the Rings that have names, and they don't have a whole lot of, they don't have a whole lot to do. So there are a lot of female characters in Game of Thrones that have power, and they're dynamic, and I think that is cool. You don't see that a whole lot.
Yeah, Daenerys Targaryen, of course, she's certainly getting her powerful woman on. Cersei, you could probably say.
Yeah.
Catelyn Stark, to some extent, in some of her things. One of the questions I wrote down the first time I was watching was, Rob's going to Catelyn now. Is she really some strategic mastermind? And then the answer I quickly found out was no. She really isn't.
She isn't. They changed that from the books too, but yeah.
So I'm wondering, though, if in the books versus the show, this is a question for Shannon, if the misogyny is as dominant a theme as it comes across in the show. Is it that way in the books, or is it kind of just part of the background and not really as relevant or something to be noticed as much?
Specifically, what do you mean?
Well, let me give you an example. For example, in the show, there's a lot of focus on men having sex for pleasure, but you really never see women having sex or, experience having their own pleasure in that way. They have their own power struggles, sure, but you don't see them having sex, right? I mean, for themselves.
I'm trying to think of a specific example.
Well, what about that kid that Tyrion and his sellsword were impressed that the prostitutes wouldn't take his money?
Comic relief.
Yeah, I really don't get that whole joke, and it went on for way too long.
Right.
The whole Podrick thing, I still don't understand it. I'm like, is that supposed to be? I don't know. I tried to read a lot into it. I was like, is it because Peter Baelish owns the whorehouses and he doesn't want to take Tyrion's money? Is there an actual reason for that joke to be there, or is it just stupid? And I think it's just stupid.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know. But I mean, let's see. Cersei Lannister has sex for her own.
Yeah, with Jaime.
Her own passions with her brother, but.
Sure.
Daenerys Targaryen enjoyed having sex with her husband, Khal Drogo.
Mm-hmm.
She loved him.
But this is all for love and because of a very specific relationship, right? Ironically, kind of traditional ways of having sex in the modern world, but there aren't women who have sex for pleasure, like sleeping around a lot like all the men do, right?
Well, who are the men sleeping with? They don't sleep with themselves.
No,
There
but
are
they
two
don't sleep
people.
with one woman either.
Well, isn't that the definition of sleeping around?
Right, and I'm just saying we're not seeing it with the women, and I'm just wondering if that's the way it is in the books too, or...
Well, specifically who's sleeping around? I'm confused.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing exactly what you're getting at, Bob. It doesn't feel like a central feature of what we're being shown to me. Just sort of, again, a representation of this time.
I mean, men go to whorehouses a lot. Like Tyrion, I guess. But he doesn't sleep around either. He gets one girlfriend and he sticks with her.
Yeah, eventually. We know he's with one girl now, but we saw like an evolution of him, and he still talks about it, like his sexual explorations before settling down with the one woman that he wants to love now. But we don't see that same scenario with women. Women either they skip over the history of their sexual exploration and they're with one man that they love, or they're just the object of a guy who's on his path to finding the right woman.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was socially acceptable then, as is now in a lot of ways, for men to have sexual conquests, way more than women. And it was not considered ungentlemanly for a highborn lord to go to a whorehouse or sleep around. Whereas if a highborn lady sleeps around, I mean, there's the whole question of pregnancy. If she gets pregnant, she's fucked.
Before the pill, things were different.
I mean, so there's that, and also just cultural misogyny. It's part of their system. Men are allowed to do that and women aren't. So I think that that's not, I mean, I think that that's an accurate portrayal of society at the time that this universe is trying to emulate. I don't think it's anything else.
Okay.
And also in the East, I mean, you see that it's different. Like Daenerys' whole storyline, she's in an entirely different continent and she's in different cultures, and sex is looked at differently over there. So I think that's accurate as well.
Okay, makes sense.
All right, I think that is as much time or more as I was hoping to spend on Game of Thrones, but I'm glad we did. It's always a pleasure to have Shannon come and break it down for us. It's much needed on this show somehow.